to Billy's books. Here is the Abbey Road. It looks like an LP, but it's really a book. Look, it's a book. That's my excuse, just like the White Album. Now, this is from the 50th anniversary, in 1969. This album came out and it changed the sound. It sort of set the template for what 70s pop music would sound like. Switching from White Album to Abbey Road really got them into a different technology. They got a whole bunch of new recording equipment, and this was the shape of the new sound, and you can hear the difference. A lot of albums in the 70s sound like Abbey Road. They set the template once again. You know, this is their last album. Here come the 70s later. Anyway, so it's a great LP. I've been a big fan of doing remixes of albums, sloppy albums. The White Album, I really welcomed that one because it had been such a mud fest, and they cleaned it up and it sounded great. And the Sgt. Pepper one sounds amazing. Yada, yada, yada. Yellow Submarine back 20 years ago. Abbey Road, the original mix, I think they got it right the first time, so all they need to do was remaster that. But they did remix it, and I'm not complaining. It is interesting because they actually changed some of the mix. I know that in I Want You, She's So Heavy, there's a really weird out note, she's so heavy, that Paul does that they pulled way lower in the mix. You can still hear it, but it's not nearly as prominent as it was in the original mix. I'm sure that was no coincidence. Anyway, so this album, this book, excuse me, is very much, I was reading, I got this out of the library. I had already gotten the regular, you know, working man's version of the remix, which is just 2 discs. It's the remixed album and then one disc of outtakes. This is the remix plus a few more discs. It's 2 discs of remixes and then a 4th DVD that just has high resolution mixes. So basically, as far as music is concerned, as far as actual, you know, additional material, if you don't consider high definition versions of things, you're only getting with this one more disc worth of outtakes. The outtakes discs on this is just a subset of the 2 outtake discs on this one. And also, so I got this book, which is a book, and I was reading through it, and I'm like, boy, I really feel like I've read this before. All these articles, I feel like I've read them before. You know why? Because it's the same material as the booklet that came with this, just bigger. So you're actually, I mean, there's a few more pretty pictures in this book, but it's really not that much more material. So as opposed to the White Album deluxe version, which is so much more expensive than the regular original release, and has so much more to offer, this one, while it's pretty, actually only has a few more things to offer, and it's much easier on the eyes because it's bigger. The actual mix of Abbey Road, the original one was very good, and you could just remaster it and be happy and it would sound like a modern record. But they did indeed remix this one, and it sounds even bigger. It's really bigger and better. Some songs sound enormous, and there is more clarity, yeah, but there was plenty of clarity before, so who cares? But there's even more clarity, and they fattened up the bass and they isolated it stuff. And just like all the remixes, it has that sensation of wow. If you bother to play it in stereo instead of something bogus, wow, it really sounds like they're playing in the room, and that's true. And of course, the outtakes are fantastic. 2 of the outtakes that are on this, but not this, were of great interest to me. One was an alternate version of Old Brown Shoe, because up until now we've only had this sort of very muddy version of Old Brown Shoe, which is the final record, final mix. There's still no remix of that actual record, just a remaster because that was an outtake thing. However, there is some dispute about whether or not Old Brown Shoe is George, Paul, and John, or George, Paul, and Ringo. And that also puts the question in mind, who is even playing drums on that weird song? Is it Paul playing drums with John playing that strange, awkward piano? Or is it Ringo playing drums and probably Paul playing that awkward piano? Either one is plausible. There's one official book that says one, there's one official book that says the other. This official book, which is the most recent and probably the most accurate, says that it is indeed George, Paul, and John, which surprises me. but there you are. What do I know? I could be wrong. The other interesting outtake that I have on here is the Ballad of John and Yoko, which, if you know your Beatles history, is interesting because it's just Paul and John playing everything. John plays all the guitars and Paul plays everything else, which is piano and bass and drums, obviously. He's the rhythm section. So, and it sounds like a Beatles record as much as anybody can tell. And what's interesting about, amidst all the contention that was going on in their lives, the two of them worked perfectly, happily, and enjoyed each other very much. And they made another hit record. They're good at that. And so those two things, Old Brown Shoe and Ballad of John and Yoko, are only on the outtakes on this, not on this. However, there are plenty of cool outtakes that are on both. One of my other favorites, my favorite outtakes from this is an earlier version of I Want You, She's So Heavy, which is possibly my favorite song on Abbey Road. And I guess the final mix that was on the album is actually a compilation of a couple different takes. They spliced the beginning with the end, or at some point to make the transition. The one that's in the outtakes is one of those takes in its entirety. And what's cool is at a certain point towards the end, when it gets down, it gets really loud and does that repeat thing into cacophony. Billy Preston's keyboard enters and it's got this sizzling, really sound, and I just absolutely love it. And it's just the coolest thing. It's really big. It's really huge. You also get to hear them in that session. The one that they do in the outtakes is them they're hearing neighbors. The neighbors are complaining they're too loud. And John's like, where are these people coming from? It's like it's a recording studio. Yeah, but you're making a lot of noise at 3 in the morning. So it's funny. Anyway, he's like, well, we'll do one more incredibly loud take and then we'll pull it back. And then they do that one and it's awesome, of course. So what am I going to say? You should definitely get the one of these versions. It's up to you. I mean, this is a reasonable price. This is overpriced, but it's pretty. It's a coffee table book. It's got lots of pretty pictures. It's got more outtakes. And if you happen to have an amazing stereo with hooked up to a Blu-ray player, then this will probably sound even better than I've ever heard it, in like a quad version and all those cool things that I've never heard. I'd love to hear this and the White Album in quad or 5.1 or whatever they call it these days, and that would be awesome. The second side of Abbey Road starts with Here Comes the Sun, but quickly goes into what's commonly known as the long one, which is their assembly of small unfinished pieces smushed together. And we all know it very well, the final version, but an earlier version of it is on this album, and it's the same songs, different takes, different incarnations of those takes in a different sequence, and it really creates a very different impression. And it's interesting to hear how it works and how it doesn't work. And the creative process is always very fascinating. They did that order and they're like, not quite, so they tried again. And I love that. And you can, as always, you get the sense of them rehearsing in your living room. And I love that. So what's up next? Well, we're going to have to wait for, in 2020, we're probably going to hear, they're going to do a movie. Peter Jackson is going to remake Let It Be, which was the miserable thing in between the White Album and Abbey Road, where they tried to make a movie and it just collapsed. And the original Let It Be movie and arguably album is kind of dismal. Supposedly, rumor has it that Peter Jackson's going to take all that footage and make something a little more upbeat and shows maybe they weren't as miserable as the original movie portrayed, and I'm sure there's going to be an album to go with it, so we're all looking forward to that. Wouldn't it be nice to see them turn Get Back, which turned to Let It Be, back into Get Back? We'll see. Until then, just keep listening to the Abbey Road record. If you can't do, review.